Our next speaker, although primarily working in film as an artist, is a woman of many trades. Tonight, she will be exploring the future of what connects us in its many forms, communication. Please welcome Lynette.
It's really fantastic to be here and inspiring to hear these talks. And I want to start a little bit by going backwards and referencing some historical points that I think are meaningful. They're meaningful for me, and I hope they're meaningful for you, and I hope that I come to an understanding of them with you by the end of my short talk. I was reading this week the essays of Alice Walker, and in it she talks about a quote by Einstein. It's sort of a paraphrasing of his quote. She saw it on, I think, a billboard somewhere. But it said, "The problems we face today cannot be solved by the minds that created them." I want to come back a little bit later to that and how that references all of the people who are in this room and the people who put this incredible group of people together to listen. The second reference I want to give you that I'll return to comes from a book written by Rebecca Solnit, and it's called Shadows and Horses. River of Shadows. I always want to talk about the horses because she's referencing some very famous photographs that really are about the beginning of film. They were taken by a man called Edward Muybridge. But Rebecca Solnit is really talking about the beginnings of photography, the beginnings of film, of telephone, and of rail as it passed across the country. Her book is really subtitled, How Technologies Changed the Wild West. And those technologies occurred in the 1800s. And they transformed the way people thought and the way they felt about time and space. I want to give you a quote from her book. She says, Ulysses S. Grant rode on one of the early railroads in Pennsylvania in 1839. And he wrote, "We traveled at least 18 miles an hour. Went at full speed and made the whole distance averaging as much as 12 miles an hour. This seemed like annihilating space." And the third reference I want to come back to is a real favourite of mine. It's what were the tools of the abolitionist movement in the UK in the late 1700s and early 1800s. There was a group of women who advocated for change to end the slave trade, and they managed to change legislation in their country. And they did it at their own kitchen tables. So first of all, let me talk to you about the project I'm doing. It's called Rekindling Venus. And I think I can go to the website that work is currently running. If I move a little bit down this page, you'll see that there's a timeline there that tells you that the next transit of Venus is 109 days. It probably doesn't have that much meaning for you at the moment. It has tremendous meaning for me. It also has tremendous meaning for us, I think, as we sit here thinking about what it means to be global citizens. The transits of the 1700s were observed by people from many countries and across the globe. It's a rare astronomical event. It only occurs in pairs, divided by a space of 122 years. So there was one in 2004, there'll be another one this year on the 5th of June, and then there won't be another for any of our lifetimes, unless some of you are planning to live till you're 140. And I'm interested in it because the observation of the transit is known as the first attempt at global scientific cooperation, and that happened in 1761. In the 1700s, one of the big challenges of the age was to work out what is the exact size of the solar system. In other words, what is the size of our home? How far away is Earth from the other planets in it? And to know the answer to that, you had to know the astronomical unit. And that was something that it was very difficult to discover. Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet fame thought that he had a solution to it, that if you could observe one planet in relation to another from various places across the globe, you might be able to work out the astronomical unit. But Halley was also a visionary who had to think about the future. he knew he would not be alive to see the transit of Venus, where he thought that problem could be solved. So he wrote a letter to the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, and he asked them, in the future, when the time came, to send ships to the four corners of the Earth to observe that event, so that this problem could be solved to the benefit of everyone. In that transit of the 1700s, 1761, the transit was observed from 62 sites around the world with 120 observers. They were French, British, Danish, German, Italian, Dutch, Swedish, and Portuguese. Those efforts for the 1769 transit were increased. There were 63 sites and there were 138 different observers. When it came to working out how you pass a British ship into French territory when you've just been at war with one another recently, the French came to a decision, which was to say, this project is to the benefit of all humanity, so we will allow the passage of British ships into French territory for the purposes of this observation. So I have spent the last 7 years looking towards this event on the 5th of June. And I'm looking at one of what I think is the global problems of our age. It's the fate of coral reefs in relation to climate change. Today, as you can see on this map here, there are 25 alerts on coral reefs, mostly around Australia, that are currently getting too hot. When the corals get hot, they get stressed, they release the very thing that they need to survive, and they begin to starve. This shows you bleaching events and hotspots on reefs around the world over the past decade. I'm not a scientist and I don't know terribly much about coral reefs, but I know I care about them. And I know that they are very fragile and highly unlikely to survive big increases in temperature. But I am an artist and I work with new tools, as every artist in every generation does. So I'm working towards this June 5th event. I'm pushing to a release of a film that will be in digital planetariums around the world on June 5th and 6th. It will be referencing that astronomical space, but in those planetariums we will be showing a film that is about coral reefs. It's going to be shown in Greenwich, where those ships were sent from. It's going to be in New York at the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History, and it will be in Taipei and Beijing, in Melbourne. It will be in as many places we can get it, and many planetariums are signing up to show it. In order to make that film, I have to collaborate with a lot of people. But the thinking behind it is global, and that's where we come back to what we're all talking about here, I think. Because 10 years ago, I couldn't have made this film. I've made a work that is a companion piece to it. It's an augmented reality work that allows you to look at some posters that we printed. I don't know if I can get that bigger. These are just pictures of corals that were taken from Lord Howe Island for research with a marine biologist I've worked with for many years. But the posters have been trained to be recognised by the mobile phone application that we built for it, called RKV Corals. And when you hold your phone up in front of those images, you see the coral descend to where it should be and where we hope it remains. And you see the fluorescence that it exhibits when we can see it under blue light. If you touch your phone again, you draw that same data feed from NOAA that I showed you at the beginning that will tell you how many reefs today are getting too hot and too stressed. So if you have that poster in your home or your office or your classroom, you can continually know what's happening with the world's coral reefs. That's the kind of work that I'm doing, and in order to collaborate with an incredible team here to do the film that will be shown in planetariums around the world, and to do that augmented reality work, I rely on the technologies that we have available to us today. That's fundamentally what I wanted to say to you. Because if you think about that Einstein quote, he's saying, the people that cause the problems may not have the minds to solve them. And there's an incredible part of Rebecca Solnit's book that I want to come back to, where she talks about the experiences of those people on those first trains. She says that when they looked out of those carriage windows for the first time, travelling at a speed that we would now think of as impossibly slow, the landscape out that window was a blur to them. They could not comprehend it. So what that tells me is we are evolving as much as our technologies. Those people changed because technology changed them. And we are changed by the technologies we are developing. You people who put this talk together today are the first people who actually can live as global citizens, because every group before you has not had the tools to do it. And because you can live as global citizens, you can think as global citizens. And that is the mind that we need to solve the problems that are too big for us. Or until this point, we have been too scared to think about, or too worried to anticipate, as every single speaker has said to you today. But I feel hopeful because the technology tells me the minds exist. Why did we imagine this plethora of incredible tools to communicate? It's because we want to go beyond our territories, and that's what they offer us. So if I come back finally to the women I told you about who really give me inspiration, and that's those women from the late 1700s to the early 1800s who helped to change the abolitionist slave trade in the US. They couldn't vote, they didn't work, apart from in their home territory. So what was it that they could do with the tools that were available for them? They fed people at a table, and every day, for every lunch and every dinner, they would place a sugar bowl on the table that said, "This sugar was not produced by slaves." And after a while, seeing those sugar bowls in very rich houses, in the houses of the very poor, in the houses of anyone who cared, eventually change came. They weren't sophisticated tools, but they were tools of the minds of that moment. And I think if those women could look around this room right now, they would champion you on about the tools you have and the people you can be and the world that you can make. Thank you.